Hi, sweet beans. Welcome back to Wild Geese. I'm your host, Anna. Two things, one of which is obvious if you're watching the video. I cut off a lot of my hair, and I'm not totally sure how I feel about it. I'm rapidly swinging from loving it one second to hating it the next. If you hate it, please keep that to yourself. But I don't know, I'll catch myself in the corner of my eye, in a window. And sometimes I'm like, yes, that's who I am. And sometimes I'm like, who is that? Self-expression is such a funny, fun, sometimes hard thing. And this was a very impulsive haircut. I've always wanted to go this short at some point in my life. And I kind of just decided that now is the time. But I went line dancing with a friend last Wednesday. Hilarious, by the way. I do not know how to line dance, but I had a lot of fun. And I remember looking around the room and kind of being like, wow, there are so many people here who are expressing an aesthetic that I have always really loved, but felt like I couldn't personally pull off. And then I was like, well, why the hell not? I feel like when I'm looking at this other person, they are expressing a part of me that I have not dared to express yet. So fuck it. I'm gonna express it. Anyway, that was a huge tangent to begin this episode. The other thing is we have made a new friend in our apartment. She's a mouse and she's so cute. I don't love the fact that she's living here. She did run out of my closet and we kind of just looked at each other for a second before she ran back in and then ran away. Not totally sure where she is now. We've closed up some holes in the walls that she might have been coming through. We've put out some humane traps. She was genuinely really tiny and cute though. We've named her Mimi. And we've done all sorts of speculation on what she does in her free time. We've definitely been anthropomorphizing her a little bit in order to cope with her presence here. And that kind of ties in with today's topic. Today, I want to talk about consciousness. Tiny topic. I want to talk about consciousness. I want to talk about natural intelligence versus artificial intelligence. I want to talk about bridging the gaps between the language of art and the language of science. This is definitely a bit of a rabbit hole episode. I've been thinking about this for months. I will preface, though, as I always do, that I am not a scientist. I am not an expert. That's my little disclaimer. I am just a person who is curious about the things that I'm going to be talking about, and I'm more interested in asking more questions versus giving more answers. I feel like you can kind of split up Wild Geese episodes between rabbit hole episodes where I'm just going on deep dive research rabbit holes and more just in the moment life learnings. And I think the last episode was more of the life learnings thing. And this episode is going to be more of a rabbit hole. Another rabbit hole example that I did a while back is the How Language Shapes the Way We Think episode. And in that, I was talking about how I'm currently learning Spanish, and I still am. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you about today's sponsor, Rosetta Stone. I personally have Spanish-speaking family members, and I'm surrounded by Spanish speakers here in New York City. So it's becoming more and more important to me to learn Spanish so that I can communicate properly with them. But my previous way of learning felt a little bit too separate from my everyday life, and I wanted a more integrated approach. So since doing that last episode, I've started using Rosetta Stone, which is an all-in-one language learning platform that you can use on your desktop or on your mobile device while you're on the go. I've been loving Rosetta Stone's dynamic immersion method, which mirrors the way that we used to learn languages as children. And it takes you one step closer to actually thinking in the new language versus just learning it on paper. You can extend your learning through phrasebooks if you're about to travel, or even take live lessons with expert tutors throughout the world. If you're ready to get serious about learning a new language and actually applying it to real-life situations, click the exclusive link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to access all 25 languages from Rosetta Stone for over 60% off an unlimited language lifetime subscription to Rosetta Stone. One payment, lifetime access. And let me know what language you decide to learn. But in my How Language Shapes the Way We Think episode, it was talking about how in certain indigenous languages, there are way more verbs than nouns, and this is because they look at the world as animate. So they wouldn't look at a tree, for example, and call the tree it. This might not be entirely grammatically correct, but from memory, it's the difference between saying, look, it's a tree, and saying, look, there being a tree. And I got a couple of comments from people saying that this is something that they used to do naturally as a child. They remember looking at the world as being alive and effectively anthropomorphizing things that we traditionally look at as inanimate. And if you don't know what anthropomorphism is, it's defined by the attribution of human form, character, or attributes to non-human entities. It is considered to be an innate tendency of human psychology. And I found this essay called The Conscious Universe by Joe Zeta, where he says, the notion of a world awake might seem unintuitive to most of us, but it is something we adopt naturally in childhood. In 1929, the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget found that children between 2 and 4 years old are inclined to attribute consciousness to everything around them. A child can happily talk to a grasshopper and blame the pavement if they trip up. It isn't such an alien thought at that age to think a flower might feel the sunlight and perhaps even enjoy it. Fairy tales and children's media are infused with animate worlds in which trees, animals, and objects come to the aid or annoyance of a protagonist. And I actually, when I read that, I was like, wow, that really explains why I'm feeling so drawn towards children's media right now. Like, not all children's media, but I started watching this show called Hilda on Netflix, which, if you've seen it, it's just like the sweetest little story of this little girl who lives in the forest and has all sorts of relationships with all of the creatures of the forest. And I feel like every episode is teaching this really beautiful life lesson through this relationship that she has with the living world. I feel like I could probably do a whole deep dive into the life lessons that are hidden within Hilda. But like one cute little weird thing is that there's something in Hilda's world called mittens, which are head lice, but they're tiny, tiny kittens. But they like cause the same symptoms as head lice would. And I just think that's such a cute little magical thought exercise that helps kids extend empathy to something that would otherwise be looked at as like disgusting. But anyway, all that to say, I think it's a pretty natural human desire to meaning make and kind of project our own experience onto other beings. And sometimes that projection can be useful. It can be really interesting. And I've been reading this book, The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlinger, which I will talk about more in a minute. But she actually said at one point, zoologists have found that elephants can recognize themselves in the mirror, crows make tools, and cats exhibit the same attachment styles as human toddlers. And I don't know about you, but when I hear things like that, there's like a different level of kinship that I feel with those creatures. So intuitively, animism seems beneficial to me, but I do understand that our intuition can lead us astray, especially when it comes to scientific matters. And in this book, The Light Eater, she actually talks about how this is a really controversial topic in the world of botany and that we're kind of at the precipice of a whole new paradigm. Is that how you say that word? Paradigm? Paradigm. Paradigm. We're kind of at the precipice of a whole new paradigm when it comes to our understanding of plant life. But even using words like plant intelligence or plant behavior can be incredibly controversial, and using those words can, in some cases, like ruin a scientist's reputation. So I want to talk about these two perspectives because I think they're actually both important. And just to frame why I feel like this topic is important to me right now, I want to actually read to you a DM that I got yesterday. It says, "How do I cope with how unnatural the world is and still build something meaningful for myself? I have so much life and energy and creativity, but everywhere I look, I get sad. Capitalism is unnatural. Patriarchy is unnatural. Even English feels unnatural, but there's very little I can do to change anything. And I can't believe I have to spend my one life on Earth buying things and budgeting, etc. It feels unnatural to live like this." And I think this is obviously a very big question that I don't believe I'm going to be able to answer today because I haven't even answered that for myself. I think we're all grappling with how to move through these systems that are causing harm. I think one thing, if you are feeling like you can't actually do anything to change the circumstances of the world, it's probably because you are looking at these huge things like capitalism and patriarchy. And yeah, of course I'm going to be paralyzed by those things because I'm one person. So something that is helpful is picking one advocacy that you can little by little chip away at to see change happen in real time. But the reason why I brought this question up in the first place is because this question, this feeling, is why I love to read and learn about ecology. The natural world has figured something out when it comes to reciprocity, and it's paved the way for our existence. I say that literally, not metaphorically. Like, if we measured it, plants would amount to, I believe it's something like 80% of Earth's living matter. I think it's crucial when you're feeling like this to remind yourself that we are not alone here. The systems we as human beings have built, the stories we've told, are not the only systems and stories to learn from. Christiana Smith on TikTok said, if you can only articulate what you're against, you're being herded into something that's worse. You want to frame it as like, okay, I want to live in a country in which immigrants feel safe and respected and cared for, and no one is profiled, kidnapped, and killed for their skin color. So obviously I use that example because of what's going on in Minneapolis right now, and I've turned my full attention over to that. If I know that's what I want, that gives me more actionable things that I can do today. You can download Signal and make sure that you're in your neighborhood's group chat so that you can alert anyone if you see ICE in your area. You can boycott Target for allowing ICE to stage in their parking lots, for abducting employees and customers, and refusing to talk to local leaders about that. I've got a link tree in the episode description with some organizations that are responding to the ICE raids in Minneapolis. I personally made a donation to the Immigrant Rapid Response Fund with the money that I made from the last episode, but all of those organizations are doing really great work on the ground in Minneapolis right now. But picking a specific area of focus sharpens the blurry lines of these like massive existential problems that you're talking about, and that results in an action plan that you can move from. So I think if you can pick a specific advocacy to pour your action into, pay attention to, watch it as it changes to see that you are specifically making a change, and find something that re-enchants the world for you when you feel like you're disgusted by human behavior, that's how I think you can hold on to hope. You can pull yourself out of this hopelessness, which is honestly what I think we all owe to each other right now. So on Substack, a couple of months ago, I saw this post that was talking about crown shyness. And it says, crown shyness is a unique behavior of certain trees where they avoid overlapping their canopies to maximize group access to resources. And I saw that and I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. They're taking care of each other. And I was looking through the comments and one person said to read this book, The Light Eaters. So I picked it up. And basically this book is by Zoe Schlanger, who is a journalist that covers climate change. And she was talking about how covering climate change was making her feel very hopeless, which makes total sense. But she found herself really fascinated with this debate around plant intelligence. So this was just a rabbit hole for her that became so all-consuming that she decided to go out and talk to as many experts as she can, and actually in some cases participate in field research where questions were being asked like, can plants see? Do plants recognize their own family members? Do plants feel pain? And the reason she said this was so reinvigorating for her as a person who usually focuses so much on the harm that humans are doing to the earth is that she says, plants are the very definition of creative becoming. They are in constant motion, albeit slow motion, probing the air and soil in a relentless quest for a livable future. A life spent constantly growing, yet rooted in a single spot, comes with tremendous challenges. To meet them, plants have come up with some of the most creative methods for surviving of any living thing, us included. And I am just going to throw out some of the fun facts that I've gathered from this book. This is only skimming the surface, but I hope, if nothing else, this gives you something fun to share when you're hanging out with your friends next. So one thing is, I'm not going to go into the specifics of the study because that's like a whole chapter of this book, but plants can hear. And I thought this was so cute. The researcher says, we found a potential hearing organ, which is the flower itself. She said when she looks at flowers now, she sees ears everywhere. Another one is strawberries can produce fruit using their own pollen. So this means they're self-fertile. They can reproduce basically by having sex with themselves. Hell yeah. Another one that is really cool is that some plants can tell time and have memory. There was a study done on a plant called Nasa poissoniana. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but basically the scientists were kind of playing the role of the bee, and they got 3 separate groups of this plant. They had the little fake bee come and probe their nectar at different intervals. So in one group, the bee would come every 15 minutes. In another group, it would come every 45 minutes. And then in another group, they left it untouched as like a control group. And the next day, after, for lack of a better word, learning the schedule, they would raise their stamens in accordance with that schedule. So the 15-minute group would do it every 15 minutes. The 45-minute group would do it every 45 minutes. And then they switched around the groups so that the schedules were different, and the flowers adapted accordingly again. This showed that they're able to count the time between the visits and then hold that memory until the next day. This is very interesting because memory is so like entangled with the way that we think about our own consciousness. But the conundrum here is that plants don't have brains, at least that we've found. So how are they doing this? And one of the scientists who conducted this study said Plants don't have these structures, obviously, but look at what they do. I mean, they take information from the outside world, they process, they make decisions, and they perform. They take everything into account and they transform it into a reaction. And this, to me, is the basic definition of intelligence. Okay, so that one is very cool. Another one that is crazy to me is that there are vines that are basically shapeshifters. The vine is called the boquila, and it's often referred to as the chameleon vine because as a survival mechanism, they change their appearance based on the other plants that are around them. So that has scientists wondering, how can they do that unless they can see? So there's a debate going on right now about whether plants can actually see or whether this is because of microorganisms that are jumping from the host plant to the chameleon vine. I think when I hear things like that, I can start to understand some more of the criticism around anthropomorphizing other beings, because that is such a complex, advanced survival mechanism. And Zoe at one point says, to many I spoke to, intelligence felt dangerous, yes, but only because most people make a mental leap directly to human intelligence. Measuring plants against human cognition made no sense. It just rendered plants as lesser humans, lesser animals. Anthropomorphizing was dangerous because it diminished these green bodies, leaving no room for recognition that plants deploy several senses, or could one say intelligences, that far exceed anything humans can do in a similar category. So I can appreciate why a lot of scientists feel like even saying the words intelligence or behavior, things like that, are oversimplifications of the real mystery that we're seeing. And I could see how buying into these ideas could serve as kind of a mental block that lead us to make false assumptions and ask less rigorous questions. But Zoe mentioned how hard it was to fully grasp what she was reading about in research papers, to come to a point of actually understanding what was happening as a person that's not a scientist and not directly in this niche world of botany herself. And she said, what public could be expected to assimilate this information on site if it had taken me this long, even with such dedicated attention? I realized part of the problem was the way the pieces of information all came wrapped in layers of hedging, language that distances plants from us at all costs. And then she brings up Theophrastus, who is a Greek philosopher who's kind of regarded as the father of botany. And it was his belief that humans needed metaphors to connect to. So he saw the core of the tree and he said, okay, that should be called the heartwood. And so he says, no one has ever looked at heartwood and expected to find the vena cava, yet it works to call to mind the right meaning. Here's the tender flesh that keeps the tree alive. And here too are the channels through which electrical signals pulse. So I don't know, this got me thinking, what is the role of metaphor within science? Maybe it's the writer in me, but I think I definitely fall on the side of thinking that science, if it is to be understood by the general public, needs to be communicated in a way that is accessible for people. And I was having so much fun with this book. I do hope that you pick it up if any of this is interesting to you, because using this as a thought exercise with your friends is really fun. I went to a dinner party and we started talking about okay, are plants intelligent? Are plants conscious? And then everyone started talking about, well, what is consciousness? Which is a really fun question to ask. And consciousness actually does not have a widely agreed upon concrete definition within science. Thomas Nagel has a definition of consciousness that a lot of people abide by, and it says, a being is conscious just if there is something that it is like to be that creature, i.e. some subjective way the world seems or appears from the creature's mental or experiential point of view. The problem with consciousness is that you can't infer an experience on another being's behalf. This might be a bit of a tangent, but I was reading this book and then I watched Alex O'Connor's podcast with Vsauce, who hilariously I did not know existed until a couple of weeks ago, but he has 20 million followers on YouTube. But they were talking about consciousness, and Alex O'Connor brought up panpsychism. And panpsychism is the belief that consciousness is ubiquitous. And our big misconception about consciousness is that it is complex. So a panpsychist would say that an electron is having an experience, something to chew on. But I will say it's interesting for me to talk to my more science-minded friends about this, my friends that are actually scientists, because they lead with a level of skepticism that I don't necessarily, and that's obviously what makes them good scientists. But their thought process and view of the world seems to demand complete logic in a way that mine doesn't always. And so I've just been thinking about these two worlds of art and science coming together. They're obviously not completely separate, but it does seem to me that making art demands us to become really comfortable with the uncertain. Like, it almost seems to hinge on a deliberate embrace of the uncertain, versus scientific integrity kind of hinges on a deliberate pursuit of certainty. And I think I'm really fascinated and in awe of people that are able to hold both of those things at the same time. I feel like on my last episode, I got a couple of comments from people saying that they felt like because they were pursuing a career in STEM, they had to leave behind who they were as an artist. And they're now trying to integrate the two things. And I actually feel like you guys are primed to do something really, really cool with the knowledge that you're gathering, because I think you might have more of that capacity to bridge the gap and make sure that the science that is being done is being communicated in a way that is understandable. Because what we as a society believes to be true comes down to messaging. There's actually an old episode of Wild Geese that I feel like perfectly ties into this topic. It's called The Ecological Self, Creating a Reciprocal Relationship with Nature, with Chloe Parsons. She's a watercolor and floral collage artist who creates art for the eco-sensual. And I feel like she's a great example of this work. Zoe Schlinger's a great example of this work. Science communicators in general, I see you, and I think what you're doing is really fucking cool, because it's tricky. You want to accurately tell the story of what's happening in the world of science without tipping into pseudoscience territory. But like, we as humans are meaning-making creatures, and people that are not there in the field doing research need to understand what's going on. And it was interesting reading this and seeing how much debate there is around the specific terms that can be used, whether we can say that plants are intelligent or that plants exhibit behavior, that sort of thing. But while all of this debate is going on, we've also got the world of big tech that is completely comfortable using terms like intelligence when it comes to artificial intelligence in order to manipulate a mass audience into looking at this product as if it is intelligent. And artificial intelligence was actually a marketing term that was first coined by John McCarthy to invite his friends to a conference at Dartmouth. Dr. Alex Hanna has a book called The AI Con, where he details the wide range of technologies that have fallen under this banner of AI, even though that's really a misnomer. This is him detailing all of the different types of AI, because trust me, it does not start and stop with generative AI.
Stop calling it AI. AI is actually a bunch of different technologies, but calling it all AI obscures that difference. My name is Alex Hanna, and I'm a sociologist that studies the AI industry and AI research. I also used to be a senior research scientist on Google's ethical AI team. It's better to talk about AI in terms of what's being automated. One type of automation are automated decision-making systems used by governments and corporations. These systems do things like determine whether someone gets a loan, choosing whether someone interviews for a job, or allocating welfare benefits. They can cause intense harm if they're used without proper human oversight. A second type of automation is classification. These are systems which determine whether an input is one thing or another. Like this picture here, are these blueberry muffins or chihuahuas? A third type are recommendation systems. These determine what you see in your news feed or video feed. You see what's on your FYP page because of what you liked and shared and what people like you liked and shared. A fourth type is automatic translation. This is moving something from one format to another. This is something like Google Translate that translates from text to another text, or something like automatic closed captioning, moving from sound to text. And lastly, we have what's called generative AI. This is stuff like ChatGPT, image generators like Stable Diffusion, and video generators like Nano Banana Pro. But calling this all AI makes it sound like this is all the same technology. Generative AI chatbots like ChatGPT are good at producing synthetic text. That doesn't mean they're good at things like creating new ideas. That's like saying because your calculator is good at adding and subtracting, it can do your taxes. It's better to create some distance from generative AI tools by giving them a silly name. The things I like to call them are mathy maths, a racist pile of linear algebra, stochastic parrots, or systematic approaches to learning algorithms and machine interfaces, aka salami.
So with all of these technologies, they lack brains, senses, and consciousness. But we're still conditioning ourselves en masse to see them as intelligent. I believe the widespread acceptance of this misnomer is leading to a world in which we feel we can outsource our own intelligence to these technologies. So we were much quicker to adopt this terminology for tech than the natural world. And I think ultimately that falls on storytelling. The story that's being told right now is that nature is a thing to be dominated. It's inferior to us. Whereas AI is this thing that we have built that can serve as a mirror of ourselves. It's become some people's way of playing God, and I mean that literally. There are like quasi-religions that are being built up around AI. I read this essay called Silicon Valley's Obsession with AI looks a lot like religion, and it's detailing a couple of specific instances of AI religions popping up. And at one point he was kind of talking about how, it's not like we're really doing anything new here. When people spent the majority of their time outside, they were worshiping the sun. Now, a lot of people that spend all day looking at a computer are starting to worship their computer. But he says, if you are reading this, you may be one of those who can choose how to spend your brief time alive on this earth. We can choose to spend time caring and sacrificing for others, enjoying good company, building institutions that bring joy and health for a time, passing them on to our descendants when our time is up, and then accepting sadness and death with grace and openness. But we are afraid. It's tempting to choose a different path, to distract ourselves, to attempt to control the uncontrollable, to try to become something we are not, to escape fate's harsh but beautiful decree that we are human and mortal. If we are traditionally religious, we take this second path by immersing ourselves in a kind of storytelling that can be delusional at times, but can also possess great beauty of its own, what the great poet Wallace Stevens, among others, called poetic truth. But non-religious people too can crave escape into what psychologist Ernest Becker called the denial of death. Just telling ourselves we want power or money or fame or convenience is not ennobling. Some prefer a story so big it makes religions of antiquity seem small by comparison. So in relation to this idea that some people are looking at technology as their god, I want to talk a little bit about animism, which is often looked at by anthropologists as like the first stage in the evolution of religion. Religion is often looked at as going from animism to polytheism to monotheism, with monotheism being the most quote-unquote civilized, but that's actually just super racist. I read this essay called Animism Recognizes How Animals, Places, and Plants Have Power Over Humans, and it's finding renewed interest around the world. And it's talking about how many environmental activists actually equate a good amount of harm to dominion theology, which positions humans as above creation. This idea that we are so much better than the plants and the animals and the rocks and the whatever because we're able to build skyscrapers and think philosophically, which allows for us to see the living world as nothing more than a collection of resources versus a web of relationships. And this essay says, what is important to understand about animism is not that it is a religion per se, nor is it a matter of merely believing that a mountain or a glacier has a soul. Animism describes practices that establish a relationship between places and people, usually one that recognizes places, animals, and plants have power over people. And I think this idea can make people very uncomfortable because of the fear that we have, I guess, of death, our own mortality, our own weakness. We look to control and dominate the world into homogeny. My thing is, I don't know if plants are intelligent or if we'll come up with a better, more accurate word for what's going on with plants at some point. I almost like the question of like, are plants conscious? Are plants intelligent? More because we don't have a concrete answer for those questions. But personally, I'm most interested in being in a relationship and learning from other beings that are in this like life and death cycle with me. I believe that I can experience the earth as animate, whether the earth is experiencing me back, I don't know, but all I can do is orient my own felt experience of the world to be aware of the beautiful ways that nature is creating networks of care. I can learn from that. And people are learning from it all over the world. There's a growing trend of well-being economies, which basically shifts the definition of societal success from GDP growth towards metrics of shared well-being, like society's relationship with nature, dignity, participation, purpose, fairness. Right now, the UN is putting together a team to see how these metrics might be measured, and the Wellbeing Economy Alliance has tons of countries that are already involved in the shift. And if you're living somewhere like the United States where it feels like there's no way that your country has anything to do with this shift, That's not true. There are mutual aid networks all throughout this country that are doing hands-on work to make this possible for us too. I feel like mutual aid is what the trees are doing with crown shyness, what we were talking about earlier, where they will avoid overlapping their canopies to maximize group resources. I think we can learn from that behavior and we can take care of each other too. And that is all I have for you today. I hope this episode was interesting for you. I know it has been incredibly interesting for me to think about what intelligence even is, what consciousness even is. A lot of you have sent me some great book recommendations that can take me even deeper down this rabbit hole. So I'm sure that this is barely scratching the surface. So please tell me what you know about this whole world. If you have any juicy little tidbits, I feel like I learned so much from you guys in the comment section. And I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.